The late afternoon sun bled across the sky of Silver Creek, a small frontier town where the trains came whistling through twice a day, and gossip traveled even faster. Dust swirled in the dry wind, coating the windows of the telegraph office and the benches of the weather-beaten platform. The air smelled of coal smoke, horse sweat, and unspoken disappointment. Standing near the edge of the platform, her small trunk by her feet, was Clara Whitmore, a woman who had left everything behind for a promise that had just been broken. Her lace gloves, once white, were now gray with dust. Her blue traveling dress was creased and faded after days on the train. She clutched a bunch of wildflowers that had already wilted, their petals curling inward as if mirroring her own heartbreak. In her other hand she held a telegram. Its paper was wrinkled and smudged, but the cruel words were still visible. "Don't come. Found someone else, sorry." 3 sentences. 3 short sentences had ended the life she thought was waiting for her. Her throat ached as she read it again, as if the pain could be lessened by seeing it enough times to dull the edges. Around her, townsfolk came and went. Rail workers, mothers with children, soldiers heading west. But to Clara, they were all blurs of motion. She was still, frozen in the wreckage of her own dreams. A few people had noticed her. Whispers had already begun. A young woman traveling alone, waiting for a man who never came. Silver Creek didn't get news often, and gossip was the next best thing. The station porter, old Hank, had offered her a cup of water and a seat by the stove inside the waiting room, but she had refused. She didn't want kindness. Kindness would break her apart. She'd been standing there since morning, watching the trains arrive and leave, hoping, against reason, that he might still appear. That maybe the telegram had been a mistake. But as the afternoon turned into evening, she realized the truth. She had been left behind, in every sense of the word. Her heart had been naive, believing the letters from that man she had never met in person. He'd written with charm and promises. Promises of a small home, a warm hearth, and a future built together in the wide plains. He'd written of his loneliness, of the need for companionship, and she had seen in him a reflection of her own yearning. Clara was not without choices when she left St. Louis. She'd had family there, a brother who told her she was foolish for trusting strangers. A few suitors had courted her politely, but none had spoken of a life built on hope and hard work. She had wanted meaning, not comfort, and that yearning had led her here to this platform, where even the sky looked too wide for one heart to bear. When the wind picked up, she held her hat with a trembling hand. Her eyes burned for more than just dust. She blinked, trying not to cry again. Crying hadn't changed anything. The clock on the wall struck 5. The train whistle in the distance faded into silence. And for the first time that day, Clara realized she was truly alone. Then, she heard it. The steady rhythm of horse hooves approaching from the dirt road beyond the station. She turned her head. A wagon rolled into view, pulled by 2 brown horses. The man driving it sat tall, reins in hand, his shirt rolled up to his elbows. Dust clung to his boots and hat, and his face bore the weary sunburn of someone who worked outdoors from dawn till dusk. In the back of the wagon sat 2 small children, a boy and a girl, both no older than 6, their faces smudged but bright-eyed, watching the world like it was full of secrets. The wagon slowed, creaking to a stop near the platform. The man tied the reins loosely to a post and stepped down. He moved with a quiet, deliberate strength. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. When he turned toward Clara, the shadow of his hat lifted just enough for her to see his eyes, gray-blue, calm, but filled with a depth she didn't expect. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps because in a crowd of strangers who had pitied her, this man's gaze carried something different. Understanding. He tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and low, touched with a western drawl. "You look like someone who's been waiting too long for a train that ain't coming." The words struck straight through her guard. She looked down, embarrassed. "You could say that," she murmured. He nodded as if he already knew. Then he glanced toward the children sitting quietly in the wagon. The boy had begun swinging his legs, humming a tune. The girl was twisting a bit of ribbon in her hands. "Name's Eli Matthews," he said. "Live about 10 miles west, out past Miller's Ridge. Got a small spread there, just me and the twins now." He looked back at Clara then, his tone softening. Their mama passed near 2 winters ago. Hardest thing I ever faced. Been raising 'em as best I can, but a man can only do so much. Clara didn't speak. She wasn't sure she could. Eli continued, not like someone making conversation, but like a man trying to speak truth. They've been needin' a gentle hand, someone who can read 'em stories at night, teach 'em their letters, teach 'em what a mother's love feels like again. The platform grew quiet. The last passengers had gone, and the whistle of the departing train was now just an echo. Then his voice changed. Lower, almost careful. If you've got nowhere to be, maybe you'd consider coming home with us. My twins need a mother like you. For a second, Clara couldn't breathe. She thought she must have misheard him. A man, this stranger, offering her a home just like that? After everything she had just lost? Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. You don't even know me, she whispered, her voice unsteady. Eli gave a slow, almost shy smile. Maybe not. But I can tell you've got kindness in your eyes. And right now, that's what my children need most. A kind soul. Clara looked away toward the horizon where the sun was setting behind the ridges. The sky burned orange and pink. For a moment, she saw two paths in front of her, the one she'd come from, full of betrayal and broken promises, and the one he offered, full of uncertainty but also a strange, fragile hope. The children in the wagon were watching her. The little girl's eyes were wide and trusting. The boy held a small wooden horse, turning it nervously in his hands. Clara felt something in her chest shift. She thought of her mother's words before she left home. Sometimes God takes away what we thought we needed, so he can give us what we were meant for. Maybe this was that moment. Still, fear lingered. What if this man wasn't what he seemed? What if she was trading one kind of mistake for another? As if sensing her hesitation, Eli took a step back, not closer, and said gently, "No need to decide now. There's a boarding house a mile up the road. Mrs. Green runs it. Tell her Eli sent you. She'll give you supper in a room. If you decide come morning you'd rather take the next train east, no harm done. But if you'd like to see the ranch, the offer stands." Clara met his gaze again. His eyes held no deceit, no pressure, only sincerity and the quiet fatigue of a man who had seen loss too. Her lips parted, but no words came. She simply nodded. Eli tipped his hat once more and turned toward the wagon. As he lifted the little girl up, she whispered something to him. He smiled faintly, then looked back at Clara. "Her name's Anna," he said. "Her brother's Luke. They'll be mighty glad to meet you proper if you choose to come." And with that, he climbed onto the wagon seat, flicked the reins, and the horses began their slow, steady trot down the road. Clara watched them go until the wagon became a dark silhouette against the dying sun. She stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at her skirt, the telegram still clutched in her hand. Then quietly she let the paper fall. It drifted down onto the tracks where it caught on a splinter and fluttered in the wind, an empty promise left behind. For the first time since she arrived, she took a deep breath. It tasted of dust and change, and as the shadows stretched across the platform, Clara picked up her small trunk and began walking, not toward the station, not toward the past, but toward the dirt road where the wagon had gone. The sun dipped low behind her and the sky turned to twilight. Somewhere ahead waited a man named Eli, two children with eyes full of hope and a chance to begin again. The next morning dawned over Silver Creek with a pale silver mist rising from the fields. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the edge of town, and the sound of wagon wheels crunching over gravel broke the stillness of dawn. Clara Whitmore stood outside the small boarding house, her worn trunk at her feet once again. Though this time her heart didn't feel as heavy. She had barely slept. The night had been a swirl of doubts and thoughts. Should she trust a man she'd only just met? Should she stay and face the humiliation of going back east, back to the whispers and pity of her old life? But when the first streaks of light slipped through the window that morning, something inside her shifted. The sting of betrayal from the man who had abandoned her still lingered, but Eli Matthews's quiet voice kept echoing in her memory. "If you've got nowhere to be, my twins need a mother like you." He had not begged. He had not flattered her. He had simply spoken truth, gentle, humble, and full of heart. And maybe that was what she needed, truth, not charm. So, with her bonnet tied neatly and her gloves mended as best she could, she waited. Right on time, the wagon came rattling down the dirt road, the horses blowing warm breath into the morning air. Eli was on the driver's seat, his hat pulled low against the chill, and beside him sat the twins, Luke and Anna bundled in blankets, still sleepy-eyed but smiling when they saw her. Eli pulled the horses to a stop and tipped his hat. "Mornin', Miss Whitmore. You look ready for the day." Clara smiled faintly. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews." The boy Luke leaned forward eagerly. "Are you coming with us, miss?" he asked, his voice bright with hope. She hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding. "Yes, I suppose I am." Anna clapped her small hands. "Papa said you might. We made space for you beside me." Clara felt her throat tighten, not from sadness this time, but from the soft warmth of being wanted. Eli climbed down, lifted her trunk with practiced ease, and secured it behind the wagon seat. He offered her his hand, and when she took it, she felt the calluses of a man who worked hard every day. His touch was firm but careful. "Let's get you home," he said simply. The horses started forward, and the town of Silver Creek slowly fell behind them, swallowed by the rising sun and the golden haze of the prairie. The first miles passed in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The sound of hooves, the creak of the wagon, and the whisper of wind through the dry grass seemed to fill the world. The land stretched endlessly, rolling fields, scattered oaks, and the occasional hawk circling high above. Clara had grown up in a city where the sky was often hidden behind roofs and chimneys. Here it was everywhere, vast, wild, unbroken. It made her feel small and alive all at once. The twins began to chatter softly. Luke showed her a carved horse he'd made with his father's knife. Anna leaned against her shoulder shyly, then asked, "Miss, do you know any songs?" Clara smiled. "I do. Do you want to hear one?" Both children nodded eagerly, their faces bright. So she sang, her voice soft but clear, the kind of tune her mother used to hum when the world felt too big. "Oh, the winds may blow and the rivers may rise, but home is where the heart never dies." By the time she reached the second verse, Anna had fallen asleep against her arm, and Luke's eyes had grown heavy. Eli glanced sideways, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I haven't heard him that quiet since Christmas," he said softly. Clara laughed quietly. "Children always listen better to music than to words," Eli nodded. "Guess that's true of grown folks, too." They rode in silence again, comfortable now, the morning growing warmer. After several miles, the wagon crossed a narrow wooden bridge over a slow-moving creek. The sound of water and birds filled the air. Eli guided the horses up a gentle slope where the road forked, one path leading to the foothills, the other into open prairie. He took the latter. "You've lived here long?" Clara asked after a while. "About 8 years now," he replied. "Bought the land before I met Mary, my wife. Built the house with my own hands." She filled it with light and laughter. "After she passed, well, I kept the roof standing, but it's been mighty quiet since." His voice caught slightly at the mention of his late wife's name, and Clara felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Thank you. She was a good woman, better than I deserved. But life don't stop because the heart breaks, I reckon." Clara turned to watch the prairie unfold, waves of grass, patches of wildflowers, and, far in the distance, a dark line of trees marking the edge of his land. "You must work hard to keep it all running," she said. Eli shrugged lightly. "Work keeps a man from thinking too much. But it's hard on the young ones. Luke tries to help, but he's still just a boy. Anna misses having someone to tuck her in. I see it in her eyes nights when the wind howls." Clara said nothing for a moment. The sincerity in his words touched her deeply. He wasn't asking out of convenience. He was asking because his heart ached for his children, and perhaps quietly for himself too. They stopped around midday near a grove of cottonwoods. Eli unharnessed the horses, letting them drink from the creek while Clara unpacked a small basket Mrs. Green had insisted she take from the boarding house. Fresh biscuits, a wedge of cheese, and a jar of preserves. They sat together on the grass while the twins ran about, chasing butterflies. Eli watched them fondly. "They've been through more than most adults I know," he said. "Still smile every day?" Clara smiled softly. "Children have a way of finding joy even when it hides." Eli turned to her. "You sound like someone who's known loss too." She hesitated, then nodded. "I have. I thought I was coming west to start a new life, with someone who promised the world. He decided otherwise before I arrived." Eli's jaw tightened. "You mean he left you stranded?" She met his eyes. "Yes, and for a while I thought that meant I wasn't worth being chosen. He looked at her for a long time, his gaze steady but kind. "Then he was a fool, Miss Whitmore. Any man who can't see worth in a woman with your courage ain't fit to walk beside her." Clara blinked back sudden tears. "You don't even know me." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's strong enough to keep standing after the world's kicked them down. That's not something you can fake." The moment hung between them, quiet and full of meaning neither dared name. By late afternoon, the land began to change. The fields grew greener, the air cooler. A wooden fence appeared on the horizon, stretching across a long hill. Beyond it, nestled in a small valley, stood a sturdy ranch house, 2 stories with a wide porch and smoke rising gently from its chimney. Clara felt her breath catch. "It's beautiful." Eli smiled, pride and longing flickering across his face. "It's home." As they rode closer, the twins began to cheer. Anna pointed at the barn, shouting, "That's where Papa keeps the kittens." Luke grinned and added, "And the chickens." "Don't forget the chickens." Clara laughed, her heart lightening for the first time in weeks. The wagon passed under the archway where a wooden sign read, "Matthews Ranch." Eli helped her down from the seat, his hand warm and steady in hers. The front porch creaked softly under their boots as he led her to the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and bread. The rooms were neat but quiet, missing the touch of a woman's hand. A few framed drawings, childish but full of color, hung on the walls. A wooden cradle sat in one corner, long unused. Eli stood for a moment, looking around. Then he turned to Clara. "It's not much, but it's honest. If you choose to stay, it'll be your home too. Not as a servant or a guest, but as someone who belongs." Clara looked at him, the twins smiling up at her, the sunlight spilling across the wooden floor. Something inside her, something broken, finally began to mend. "Then," she said softly, "I think I'd like to stay for a while." Eli nodded, his voice low with relief. "You're welcome here, Miss Whitmore, truly." Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain and new beginnings. Inside, for the first time in years, laughter began to fill the house again. The days that followed her arrival at the Matthews Ranch unfolded like the slow turning of a new season, each sunrise painting Clara's life in colors she hadn't seen before. The first week was quiet, almost awkward at times. She was a guest in a stranger's home, unsure of where to place her hands or her heart. But little by little, the rhythm of the ranch began to seep into her bones. Each morning, before the sun even touched the far ridge, Eli would already be outside, chopping wood or saddling a horse. The faint sound of the axe against the block became Clara's new kind of clock. She would wake to the smell of dew and hay, wrap her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and step out to fetch water from the well. The first time Eli saw her doing that, he frowned. "You don't have to, Miss Whitmore," he said, setting down his tools. "You're our guest." She met his eyes, firm but kind. "Then perhaps it's time I earned my place, Mr. Matthews. I've been idle too long." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right then, but call me Eli." From that morning on, the house began to feel alive again. Clara scrubbed and mended what had long gone unattended. Curtains were washed and rehung, old rugs beaten clean, and the children's clothes carefully stitched where they'd torn. She filled the kitchen with warmth, the scent of bread baking, and the sound of laughter that had been missing since Mary Matthews passed away. Anna followed her everywhere, clutching her apron and asking endless questions about her ribbons, her songs, and whether she liked kittens or horses better. Luke pretended not to care, but was always nearby, watching with quiet curiosity as she read them stories in the evenings by lamplight. Eli often paused outside the doorway to listen. There was something in Clara's voice, soft yet strong, that filled the empty rooms with peace. Still, life on a ranch was not all calm evenings and gentle laughter. By mid-autumn, the first hints of trouble arrived with the wind. The skies darkened earlier each day and the air grew sharp. The cattle that grazed in the far pastures had to be driven closer to shelter. Eli worked longer hours, and Clara began to see the weariness behind his quiet strength. One evening, as he came in covered in mud and dust, she met him at the door with a towel and a worried look. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said, her voice firm. He shook his head. "Ain't got much choice. Winter's comin'. If I don't fix the southern fence before the next storm, we'll lose half the herd." "Then let me help." Eli blinked, almost smiling. "You?" Out there in the cold with splinters and barbed wire? Clara lifted her chin. I wasn't raised to faint at the sight of work, Mr. Matthews. You need an extra pair of hands, and I've got two. He wanted to argue, but saw the determination in her eyes. So the next morning, when the dawn came pale and bitter, she rode out beside him. The land stretched wild and endless, frost glinting on the grass. Her fingers went numb quickly, but she refused to complain. Together they repaired broken posts, hauled wire, and checked the herd. At one point, a startled calf bolted toward the ravine. Without hesitation, Clara ran after it, skirts gathered in her hands, shouting for Eli. He reached her just as she caught the calf's lead rope, breathless and flushed with adrenaline. The wind tangled her hair and her cheeks glowed pink. Eli stared at her for a heartbeat, admiration flickering in his storm-gray eyes. You're a brave one, he said softly. Clara smiled, breath misting in the air. You'd be surprised what I can do when no one expects much of me. He looked at her a long moment before murmuring, I ain't surprised anymore. As days turned into weeks, that unspoken connection between them deepened. They didn't speak of love, no, not yet, but it wove itself through every glance, every small kindness, every silence that felt like understanding. Still, the world had its test waiting for them. One night, the wind howled through the valley like a ghost. The door rattled on its hinges and the lamps flickered. Eli stepped outside to secure the barn doors while Clara tucked the children into bed. But as she leaned over Anna's small form, she noticed the girl's skin burning hot and her breathing shallow. Eli, she cried. He was inside in moments, mud on his boots and rain dripping from his hat. What is it? Anna, she's feverish. Eli knelt beside the bed, pressing a calloused hand to his daughter's forehead. His face went pale. It's bad. She's burning up. Clara moved swiftly, years of caring for her younger siblings back east guiding her hands. She boiled water, mixed vinegar with cloths, and wiped Anna's brow. Through the long night, she didn't rest. She read psalms softly when the fever rose too high, whispered comfort when the child whimpered for her mother, and prayed silently when her hands began to shake with exhaustion. Eli stayed by the door, helpless, guilt written across his face. Maybe I should ride for Doc Harlan, he said hoarsely. Reaching for his coat, Clara caught his arm. The storm's too fierce. You'd never make it. Let me tend to her. Trust me. He looked into her eyes, steady, compassionate, unwavering, and slowly nodded. Hours passed. The storm raged, lightning splitting the sky. But just before dawn, Anna's fever broke. Her breathing steadied, and she fell into a peaceful sleep. Clara sat back, tears of relief slipping down her cheeks. Eli knelt beside her, his voice breaking. You saved her, Clara. I don't know how to thank you. She shook her head, exhausted but smiling faintly. You don't need to. He hesitated, then reached out and gently took her hand and her rough fingers brushing over hers. I mean it. You brought life back to this house. To all of us. Their eyes met in the dim lamplight, and for the first time neither looked away. Something passed between them. Fragile, powerful, undeniable. But before either could speak, a small voice interrupted them. Papa, murmured Anna, half asleep. Don't let her go. Eli swallowed hard, glancing from his daughter to Clara. I won't, he whispered. By the time spring rolled over the hills, the ranch had changed, not just the land, but the hearts within it. The children adored Clara, following her like shadows. The neighbors began to speak kindly again of Eli Matthews, no longer the lonely widower, but the man who had found light after loss. Clara worked beside him each day, helping with calves, tending the garden, patching roofs, and sharing quiet meals under the open sky. Once, when she was carrying a bucket of feed, Eli came to take it from her. Their hands brushed, and he smiled in that quiet way of his. You've done more for this place in a few months than I have in years, he said. She smiled back. It wasn't the place that needed fixing, Eli, it was the hearts inside it. He chuckled softly. Then I reckon you've mended mine too. The words lingered between them, simple but real. That summer, the ranch thrived. The fields were green again, the fences strong, the house full of laughter and life. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Clara stood on the porch watching the twins play in the yard. Eli came up beside her, his hat in his hands. When I asked you to come with us that day, he said quietly, I only meant to give my children a mother. I didn't realize you'd end up saving me, too. Clara turned toward him, her heart swelling. And I didn't realize that the man who offered me a home would become the reason I'd never want to leave it. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of crickets filled the air and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Eli reached out, his hand warm and sure against hers. "Clara," he said softly, "I don't know what tomorrow'll bring, but I know I don't want to face it without you." Her eyes shimmered. "You won't have to." And as the twilight deepened, their joined hands told the rest of the story, of two souls broken by loss and betrayal, who found in each other the one thing they thought they'd never see again: home. By the time the frost melted from the fields, life at the Matthews Ranch had begun to find its rhythm again. Clara had turned the cold, silent house into something warm and full of laughter. The twins, once shy and half wild, now raced to meet her each morning, their small boots thudding across the porch. Even Eli, who had long lived with quiet grief, found himself smiling more often, sometimes for no reason at all. But peace, Clara was learning, was a fragile thing on the prairie. It could be shattered not by storms or sickness, but by memories that refused to stay buried. The morning it happened, the sky was wide and blue. The air carried the scent of thawing earth and pine. Clara was at the chicken coop with Maggie, the little girl, when she heard the sound of hooves, not Eli's steady pace, but fast, urgent, coming from the road. She looked up, her hands still dusted with feed, and saw a man dismounting near the gate. His hat was fine, his coat too clean for a working man. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to shovel his own path through a storm. When he lifted his head, Clara's breath caught. Henry Dalton. The man she had once been promised to marry. The same one who had left her stranded at that station, heartbroken and humiliated. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her pulse in her ears. She could still see that telegram in her hands, those 3 cold words, "Found someone else." And now here he stood as if nothing had ever happened. "Clara," he said, smiling like the years and pain between them didn't exist. "You're a hard woman to find." She straightened, her fingers gripping the wooden fence. "You didn't try too hard before," she said, her voice even. He chuckled, stepping closer. "I made a mistake back then, but I've come to fix it." Maggie had crept closer, peeking from behind Clara's skirt. Henry noticed and frowned. "Yours?" "No," Clara said quickly. "Eli's." Something sharp flickered in Henry's eyes, a flash of judgment, then confusion. "You married that rancher?" he asked, disbelief thick in his voice. Clara didn't answer right away. Part of her wanted to say yes, to protect the fragile life she'd found. But the truth was that she and Eli weren't married, at least not yet. Their bond had been forged in trust and shared struggle, not vows. Before she could speak, Eli appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression was calm but wary as he took in the stranger. "Can I help you?" Eli asked, stepping closer. Henry's tone turned polished. "Name's Henry Dalton. I came from St. Louis. I'm looking for Miss Clara Whitmore." Eli's gaze flicked to her, then back to Henry. "You found her," he said simply. Henry's smile widened. "Then I suppose you also know she's a lady, not a ranch hand. She doesn't belong out here, shoveling mud and feeding chickens. I came to take her home," the words burned. "Take her home." As if she hadn't already found one. Clara took a step forward, her voice trembling but firm. "You lost any right to say where I belong the moment you left me waiting at that station." Henry's charm cracked for the first time. "You're angry and you have every right. But I've changed, Clara. I came back for you. The woman I was with, she passed. I realized what a fool I'd been. You were kind, patient, good, and I want to make it right." Eli stayed silent, but the air between the men grew heavy. Henry noticed the look in his eyes, protective, steady, something deeper, and sneered slightly. "And what's this rancher to you, Clara? A friend? A boss?" Her lips parted, but before she could answer, Maggie ran up and clung to her skirt. "Mama, Papa says lunch is ready." The word Mama froze everyone. Henry blinked in shock. Eli's jaw tightened. Clara gently touched the child's hair. "Go inside, sweetheart. I'll be there soon." When Maggie was gone, Henry's voice dropped. "So that's it then? You're playing mother to another man's children?" She looked him square in the eye. "Not playing, being, because they needed someone who wouldn't leave." The silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. A cold wind swept across the yard. Henry stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this life will love you back?" You're too good for this dirt and dust. Clara, you could have comfort silk dresses, servants, everything you deserve. Her heart thudded painfully, memories of her old life flickering before her eyes. The city lights, the carriages, the promise of security. But then she thought of Eli's tired smile when he came in from the fields, the children's laughter at breakfast, the warmth of their home when the storm raged outside. It wasn't luxury, but it was real. I already have everything I deserve, she said softly. Eli finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. You should ride back to town, Mr. Dalton. You've said your piece. Henry glared. You think you can keep her here? You've got no right. Eli's eyes didn't waver. She's free to go if she wants to. But you don't decide that. Clara's hands trembled as she looked between them. Years ago, she might have been swayed by Henry's smooth words. But now, standing on the earth she had helped till in the home she had helped rebuild, she knew who she was. I'm not the same woman you left, she said, and I don't need saving anymore. Henry stared at her for a long moment, his pride battling disbelief. Then, with a sharp motion, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off down the road without another word. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. For a long time, no one spoke. Eli finally broke the silence. You all right? Clara nodded slowly, though her eyes glistened. I think so. He reached out, his rough hand brushing hers, not possessive, just steady. Then let's get the twins fed before the stew burns. A small, shaky laugh escaped her lips. And as she followed him back toward the house, a weight she'd carried for years finally lifted. That night, when the fire crackled and the twins were asleep, Clara sat by the window looking out at the stars. Eli joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. Funny thing, he said, handing her one. Storms come, things break, people leave, but sometimes what's left after, she's stronger. Clara smiled faintly, her gaze still on the night sky. Maybe that's what love is. He looked at her, quiet for a long moment. Then he said, almost shyly, If it is, I reckon I don't want to lose it. Her heart stilled. Slowly, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. There were no grand declarations, no sudden kisses. Just the steady warmth of 2 souls who had already chosen each other long before words made it real. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the fields, carrying away the last echoes of the past, and in the silence that followed, something new took root, a peace that was hard-earned, fragile, and beautiful. Spring came slowly to Silver Creek that year, like a wounded thing learning how to walk again. The last of the snow melted into the thirsty earth, and wildflowers began to crawl up from the ground in bursts of yellow and violet. The ranch, once scarred by storm and loss, breathed again. Clara had found her rhythm in the days. She rose before dawn, her apron tied neatly, the scent of coffee and bread filling the kitchen before Eli returned from the barn. The twins would tumble in, hair messy, faces bright with sleep, calling, Mama, can we feed the calves? And though she sometimes still hesitated at the word Mama, her heart never failed to swell each time she heard it. She had once thought of herself as a woman without a place, but now when she looked at this home and at the little curtains she'd sewn herself, at the children's boots lined up by the door, at Eli's hat hanging beside hers, she knew she had built something no telegram or heartbreak could ever destroy. Yet beneath the peace of their days, there was a quiet current she couldn't ignore, something unspoken between her and Eli. Ever since that day Henry Dalton had appeared and vanished again, the air between them had changed. He was still kind, still steady, but there was a careful distance now, as though he was holding himself back from saying something that lingered on his tongue every evening, only to vanish like smoke. One afternoon, as she was hanging laundry behind the house, she caught him watching her from the corral. He leaned against the fence, the wind ruffling his shirt, his gaze thoughtful. When she met his eyes, he looked away quickly, adjusting his hat and heading for the fields. It made her smile. That same man who'd faced down storms, coyotes, and the weight of the world, shy around a woman like her. That night, when the twins were asleep, Clara sat by the hearth, mending a shirt of Eli's. He came in quietly, smelling of leather and hay, and paused when he saw her. You fixin' that old thing again? He asked, half smiling. She looked up at him. You keep tearing it. Somebody has to make sure you don't go out half-dressed. He chuckled, then his smile faded. Clara, he began, voice lower now, almost uncertain. You ever wish you'd gone back with him? That fella from St. Louis? Her needle stilled. She lifted her eyes to his. those steady gray eyes that always saw right through her. "No," she said softly. "Not once," he exhaled slowly, nodding. But she saw something still flicker in him, a doubt maybe, or a fear he'd never spoken aloud. She set the shirt aside. "Eli, do you regret asking me to come here?" His head snapped up, startled. "No," he said, almost fiercely. "Not a day of it." "Then why," she asked gently, "do you keep walking around like you're afraid of losing me?" He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then he said, "Because I've already lost too much. My wife, my father's land for a time. I don't want to look at something I care about again and wonder if it'll be gone come morning." The honesty of it broke something tender open in her chest. She rose and crossed to him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "Eli, you didn't bring me here to save me. We saved each other. You gave me a home when I had nothing left, and I want to be here, not because I owe you, but because I choose you." The silence stretched between them, filled with the warmth of the fire and the faint whistle of the wind outside. Slowly he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't want you to just stay. I want you to stay as my wife." Clara froze, her breath catching. For a moment the world around them fell away. No sound but the crackle of the fire and the beating of her heart. He continued, his words rough but sure. "I ain't got much to offer. No fancy house, no fine dresses. But you've made this place more like home than it's ever been. And the twins, they already look at you like you're the sun itself. So if you'll have us, if you'll have me, I'd be the luckiest man alive." Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. For so long she'd been waiting for someone to see her. Not as a burden, not as a woman to rescue, but as a partner. A heart that beat beside theirs. And now here it was. Quiet, humble, and more real than any dream she'd once had. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you, Eli Matthews." He smiled then, not wide or showy, but deep. The kind of smile that starts in the soul. He pulled her close, and for the first time he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate kiss of lonely hearts, but the slow, certain one of two people who had earned every second of peace between them. Outside, the prairie wind carried the scent of blooming sage and fresh rain. The stars above Silver Creek shone brighter that night than either of them had ever seen. The wedding was small, held on the ranch a week later. Hank, the old station porter who had once offered Clara a seat by the stove, came to stand as witness. The twins dressed in clean clothes, their cheeks glowing with excitement. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, its hem fluttering in the soft breeze. Eli stood waiting by the big oak tree at the edge of the pasture, the same tree that had survived every storm just as they had. When the preacher asked his question, Eli's voice didn't waver. "I do." And when Clara spoke her vows, her hands didn't shake. "I do," she said, "with all that I am." The twins cheered and everyone laughed, even Eli, who rarely did. Then they ate pie and stew, and the little family that had once been broken found itself whole again. That evening, when the guests had gone and the sun sank low over the horizon, Eli took Clara's hand and led her up the hill behind the house. From there they could see the valley spread below, the barns, the pastures, the golden light washing over the land. "This is where I buried my wife," Eli said quietly. "I thought this hill would always remind me of loss. But now when I stand here with you, it feels like home again." Clara squeezed his hand, her voice trembling. "Then let it be where life begins again." He turned to her, his eyes shining in the fading light. "You've given me that, Clara. You've given all of us that." She smiled through tears, leaning against him as the last rays of sun painted the sky in fire and gold. The twins' laughter floated faintly from the house below, and in that sound there was no grief, no loneliness, and only life. As the stars began to bloom across the sky, Eli whispered, "You remember what I said the day we met? That my twins needed a mother like you." "I remember," she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked, his voice full of quiet awe. "I was wrong," he said. "They didn't just need a mother. I needed you too." Clara smiled, her heart full to the brim. "Then we both found what we were missing. And with that, they stood together under the open sky, no longer strangers, no longer broken people piecing together a life, but a family bound by something stronger than fate. the choice to love, to stay, and to begin again.